Americanuck Radio.
News, opinion, and a little irreverence from both sides of the 49th parallel. This is Americanuck Radio with Mike Phillip.
I won't say those fighting words for everyone within the sound of my voice to hear and to heed from my cold, dead hands.
Welcome back to Americanuck Radio, everybody, and those were the immortal words of Moses at an NRA convention. I'm talking about Charlton Heston and the immortal words from my cold, dead hands. God bless you, America. I love it. We've got Blair Hagan of the National Firearms Association joining us on the show. Mr. Hagan, how are you doing?
Pretty good, Mike.
Excellent. So Blair is the, hang on a second here, I'm just pulling up your bio. Blair was the NFA field officer 97 to 2004, vice president of the British Columbia branch of the National Firearms Association 2004 to 2005, national vice president of the NFA 2005 to 7, national president of the NFA from 2008 to 2010, and he's the executive vice president of the NFA and BC Yukon director from 2010 to present. So you have been around the fight for gun rights for a long time, Blair.
Yeah, you could say I've been around the block.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So let's talk about the NFA, Blair. Why was it formed? How long has it been around? And what do you guys do?
National Firearms Association was formed in 1979 in Ottawa in response to a gun bill that was introduced by the Liberal government of the day. We moved to Edmonton, Alberta in 1984. We've been headquartered in Edmonton since then. Basically, we're Canada's oldest firearms advocacy group. We've been active in fighting legislation, fighting for firearms law reform, and assisting individual Canadian firearms owners who have run afoul of these, well, frankly, crazy laws ever since then.
Well, that's just it. Well, I mean, you have the actual laws, and then you have the perception of the laws. Would that be an accurate assessment?
That's true. There's not a lot of understanding of these laws among anybody, really, firearms owners, law enforcement, even politicians.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's all public perception. I mean, legally, you could walk around downtown Edmonton with a shotgun strapped to your back. You're going to get SWAT teamed.
It wouldn't necessarily be a Firearms Act offense, but neither would it be advisable either. I'm sure
you'd get swatted.
Something to charge you with. Yeah. I'm sure they would find something to charge you with. But when you're talking about a non-restricted firearm, and there's a lot of confusion about the storage and transportation laws as they pertain to Canada. If you're talking about non-restricted firearms, the transportation regulation for those firearms is when you're transporting them, they must be unloaded. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had a run-in with the border down at Sweetgrass. I had a shotgun in my trunk, and they freaked out. And I had it in a locked case with 4 locks on it. And they called the RCMP in, and they told the RCMP that I drove up to the border with the shotgun in the front seat with one in the pipe.
What? They lied? They
lied? Isn't that amazing? So I'm glad you got into the whole transportation and storage thing, because that is a big deal. Now, a lot of Americans listening to this, you might think, why do I care about a Canadian gun rights advocacy group? Well, you better care, because this isn't just something that's facing America. This is a worldwide movement. The UN has this treaty on guns. Can you get into that a little bit, Blair?
Yeah, the UN Small Arms Agreement, basically this was formulated back in the 1990s at the UN. A number of nations, a lot of nations have signed on to this. There's a number of aspects to it in terms of the control of arms, domestic gun control agendas, even something that we faced just recently here in Canada, the marking of arms entering your country, the UN Small Arms Marking Agreement, where that's every firearm that enters your country, and this was to take place in Canada June 1st. It has been delayed a year. Every firearm entering the country had to be marked with a second serial number. Why? Well, basically, when that firearm was illegally exported from Canada and was used to arm some guerrilla group somewhere in Africa or something, they would know where it came from. This is the type of craziness that we're seeing. The United States has been largely insulated from this to a large degree, although previous administrations have signed on to these things and did support them. The Clinton administration back in the 90s, the Obama administration just recently. These regulations have never made it past the U.S. Congress or Senate. However, is that always going to be the case? I don't know. Americans need to be educated about this if they're going to continue to preserve their Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's such a part of our culture. Canada has a major gun culture. What are gun ownership rates in Canada? I don't personally know anybody. Most people that I know have at least a 22. So, what are we looking at with... Go ahead.
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. Official rates of ownership or unofficial. There's 2 million firearms licenses in force, and it's funny. The CBC recently came out with a scathing report that the rate of firearms licensing was increasing in Canada, and this was a danger to public safety, and the government needed to do something about this. And we were really quite confused by that because we thought that's what they wanted to encourage. They wanted people who had guns to get firearms licenses and be compliant with the law. But apparently the CBC and I guess certain actors in the government saw this as a danger to public safety. But it gives you an idea of the official views of firearms compared with Canadian realities. And yes, Canada probably has one of the highest rates of firearms ownership, individual firearms ownership of many of the first world countries. It's pretty common in Canada for people to own firearms. The problem came under the government that introduced the Firearms Act back in the 1990s, where they wanted to impose mandatory licensing and universal registration. So anybody who had a firearm had to get a firearms license. It's a mandatory firearms license for simple ownership or possession of a gun. And a lot of people don't understand that. What's the big deal? You got a gun, get a license. Well, in Canada, it has been an offense to possess any firearm since the end of 1998. The firearms license authorizes you to commit that offense for a 5-year period. You're still committing
like buying an indulgence.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, you're paying a tithe to own your property.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the disconnect comes in. People don't understand the situation, and they don't understand the culture. And we pay huge bucks to the CBC to have them tell us why our culture is wrong and bad, and it needs to change because we need to be more like, let's say the UK or Australia.
We're getting better. We're getting better in this country about asserting that. The controversy over the imposition of, it was widely regarded as an issue of gun registration. Long gun registration, the long gun registry, the infamous long gun registry, and the controversy that was created over that. And what it had the effect of doing is making Canadians take a second look at this issue. We're usually pretty cooperative, we're pretty easygoing about things. However, when it came to this issue, it really ignited a lot of passions and changed a lot of attitudes among firearms owners. And I think it's...
That's why Stephen Harper won that election in a landslide based on the promise to scrap the gun registry because a lot of Canadians hated it. We've just got a few seconds here left. You want to just put a bookend on that?
Yeah, no, in that election, his opposition, the government of the day was warning, this guy is in the pocket of the gun lobby. If you're going to get a lot of American-style gun laws if you elect this guy. He finally got elected with a majority government on the promise of ending that gun registry. It showed that firearms law reform in Canada could be popular and a government could get elected on it.
Yeah, they could, absolutely. I hear the music, and that means we're at the end of this break. We've got Blair Hagan of the National Firearms Association standing up for property, gun rights, and self-protection, self-preservation in Canada. We'll be back right after this.
Syntec Global XFT is a breakthrough product trusted around the world for over 20 years. Syntec Global XFT will maximize engine life and fuel economy, maximize horsepower and performance, and minimize emissions. XFT packs an incredible amount of benefits into one small concentrated dose and comes with a 100% satisfaction guarantee. That's Syntec Global XFT. Put it to the test.
Head over to Americanuckradio.com now to get your extreme fuel treatment. That's Americanuckradio.com.
Welcome back to Americanuck Radio. This is your host, Mike Phillip, and head over to Americanuckradio.com. We got all kinds of updated news articles every day and some great products that we sell through this show. And if anybody wants to accuse me of doing radio to sell things, I stand guilty. Too bad. Don't care what you think. We've got Blair Hagan of the NFA talking about Canadian gun rights. So listen. The NFA has a service where you can become a member for $35 a year. What all does that get an individual, Blair?
Well, you get the satisfaction of sending us to Ottawa to lobby on your behalf. I mean, you look at the United States and the effect NRA has on politics in that country. 4 million NRA members. That is a lot of votes. That's a big voting block, and that's basically what we need to do in Canada. Since the advent of the Firearms Act back in the 1990s, we've had an Americanized gun debate in Canada, and that was created by the civil disarmament lobby. They probably didn't mean to do that, but they did it anyways. That being the case, we need members. We need members to provide that strength, because when I go to Ottawa, the first thing they ask me is, how many members you got? And we're doing pretty good now. We've got 75,000 members nationwide. And I know to Americans that doesn't sound like a lot, but this is Canada. It's a much smaller population. And that membership needs to grow. It needs to be bigger in order to give us the influence that we need to change gun laws here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about cases that NFA lawyers have been in the past here in Canada in regards to firearms laws, where they were going to try and railroad some poor guy over this or that. Let's get into some of the case history here.
Sure, yeah, and that's basically a day-to-day service that we provide, because a lot of firearms owners know that if you do have a problem, if you are charged under the Firearms Act, you can contact National Firearms Association, get a lawyer referral, and get the type of legal advice that you need to defend yourself. And it's usually centered, the daily thing is usually centered on the storage and transportation laws. These were brought in almost 30 years ago, probably with the best of intentions. We all want to be safe. We all want to prevent harm to people around us, but the way that they're applied in Canada has been much, much wider, and because of the general ignorance of that among law enforcement, I hate to say it, you get a lot of misapplied charges to people who have no business being charged in the first place. So you do get that. You do get access to that. You also, we're also more of a lobbying organization these days, because as gun politics got heavily politicized in the last 20 years, it became more important to influence the political situation towards firearms law reform than actually defending these things in court. We'd like to get to a point where we reform firearms laws. We have a new Firearms Act that precludes people being wrongfully charged. And it's always been this way. I know in the last 20 years, after the advent of Bill C-68 and the long gun registry, it got really, really bad. But it was the same before. We've never really had really cogent gun laws in Canada. They've been less. They've been, less onerous towards law-abiding people in the past. But they're just crazy now, and the only solution to this is going to be a new Firearms Act. We were hoping we were going to get that under the last government. Didn't happen. We got the end of long gun registration. and some minor reforms, but the only solution to this is future government bringing in a new Firearms Act that recognizes Canadian realities of firearms ownership.
What's the reality of the current government in Canada changing the gun regulations?
Well,
do you think?
As you're probably aware, this is not a firearms-friendly government.
No.
Okay. The Liberal Party got really beat up in the past over gun laws. The gun registry was a failure. They lost several elections over it. They were out of power for quite a while, largely based on the way they approached the issue. They really lost a lot of votes. Just because you own a firearm in Canada doesn't mean you're a conservative. Okay?
Yep.
Members of my organization, we represent conservatives, liberals, NDPers, and independents. It's not just conservatives who own guns. So in the past, the liberals have lost votes over that and, suffered a very, very great embarrassment over that legislation. And as a result, they don't really want to come across as being seen as overtly anti-gun now. However, in the last election, they did make several election promises, crack down on handguns and assault weapons, and implement the UN smart. Yeah, assault weapons. Yeah, apparently that is any semi-automatic rifle. Don't you know?
Yeah. What about pepper weapons? Oh, not that kind of assault.
Oh, yeah. That was
Sorry,
really bad.
I'm just catching up with the program here.
Yeah, it's funny because
pepper, I put that on my steak.
Yeah.
There
I put pepper on my steak.
Yeah, I'm dating myself with that.
There you go. So, but it's funny. I want to point that out, that Canadians, they have no idea what an assault weapon is. I mean, it's anything that looks scary, like the AR-15. It really comes down to the round that's chambered. I mean, I have, I'll give you an example. I am the very proud owner of a beautifully German-engineered Heckler Koch SL84. And it's a beautiful gun. And it fires the exact same round as an AR-15. That is not restricted. The AR-15 is, just to give Americans an idea of what we're dealing with here. What were you going to say, Blair?
It's funny, the symbolism of the AR-15 rifle in Canada. Okay, and we've got a campaign going. It's our No Compromise campaign. A lot of firearms owners might be familiar with it. We've got we're selling scads and scads, T-shirts and decals and stuff with this symbol of a maple leaf combined with a C8 carbine, which is the Canadian version of the US M4. And it's a hybrid of these two images, and it's very, very provocative. A lot of people get freaked out when they see it. It's like, my God, that's an assault rifle combined with a maple leaf. How could you? How could you do this? And I'm sorry, this is Canada. This represents thousands of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Their rights, their property. But the AR-15 in Canada, AR-15 started coming to Canada probably in the mid-late 1960s when Colt introduced the AR-15. During the 1970s, this is a non-restricted rifle, and it was used for hunting, varminting, all the usual purposes for a .223 rifle. Late 1970s, the Liberal government introduces a gun bill, and they make it restricted, like a handgun. Well, nobody can use this for hunting. This is an assault rifle. The round is, all of those fallacies and the controversies that came out of the Vietnam War and the M16. Well, the bullet tumbles and it blows the animal apart, so you can't use the meat. So we're gonna make this restricted because it's not a hunting rifle. It was restricted for a couple of years. Another government came in, took it off the restricted list, and it was a non-restricted rifle again until the early 1990s. After the Montreal Massacre in 1989, Marc Lépine, L'École Polytechnique, where he murdered 14 female engineering students at that university in Montreal. And, of course, that really changed the nature of the gun debate in Canada. We got two pieces of very, very bad legislation out of that. And Bill C-17 in 1991, which was brought in by a progressive conservative government, restricted the AR-15, once again, based on the looks of this thing. This is an assault rifle. This is not a rifle Canadians should own.
This is why we need the NFA, everybody. I hear the music. That means we're at the end of this segment. Coming up, we're going to talk about more crazy Canadian gun laws and what you can do about it as an individual to get them reversed for your own universal basic human rights. Americanuck Radio will be back after this. Welcome back to Americanuck Radio. This is your host, Mike Phillip, coming at you live from Western Canada. We've got Blair Hagan of the NFA, very important organization, and they defend gun rights for gun owners. That is their property. If you have a gun, it belongs to you, not somebody else. And just because you have to buy a license to have one doesn't mean that people are running around shooting each other here. It doesn't happen, okay? I mean, our crime stats are really low. So before the break, you were talking about the AR-15 and its history in Canada. Let's continue with where you were at there.
In 1991, under Bill C-17, it was due to go prohibited in 1995 under Bill C-68 until the Dominion of Canada Rifle Association made an overture to that government that if the rifle was prohibited, that would kill service rifle competitions in Canada because of the C7 rifle being, Canada's service rifle at that time, the AR-15 being the civilian semi-automatic version. You ban this gun, that's the end of service rifle competitions. So the government relented and said, okay, we'll keep it restricted for a while. We'll ban it later on. It was a very controversial piece of legislation, and they were trying to mitigate that a bit. So it's been restricted ever since, and unfortunately, since then, it's become, the modern sporting rifle. I mean, this is a hunting rifle everywhere in the world except Canada, where it is restricted to target ranges. And if you ask the government why this is the case, they can't really give you an answer. It's, nobody needs one of those for hunting. Well, what do you mean? It's a hunting rifle everywhere else.
Yeah.
Why not Canada? Well, because we just don't like it.
Yeah, it looks scary.
Yeah, it looks scary. That's not a rifle Canadians should own. So there's no real explanation for any of this, and a lot of gun control is based on smoke and mirrors here, and that's got to change.
Yeah, well, people need to understand their rights. So during the break we were talking, you were telling me that Canadians actually can get a carry license. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, no, there's a provision for a permit to carry in Canada. It's called an authorization to carry. Unfortunately, it's so rarely issued, and the criteria for issuing that license is so narrowly defined and controlled that almost nobody has it. Okay? And that's a problem of the Firearms Act. It's not a shall-issue license. It's a very, very narrowly defined maybe issue for a short period of time permit. But it does exist.
So what you're saying is that any legal handgun owner in Canada can apply for a permit to carry, but they just won't give it to you, is what you're saying?
Yeah, there's about a 98% chance that you'll be refused.
Yeah.
But it is there, and it doesn't exist, and it shows that they do recognize that there are instances where, individuals do need to carry. But unfortunately, it's just, this hierarchy of situations where they want to control it so narrowly that most people don't even know this exists. I mean, that's how narrowly controlled it is.
And you can also, there's provisions for permit to carry a handgun, not just for self-defense or your life's under threat or something like that, but trappers can get one too. And there's a case in Quebec that recently happened. Are you familiar with that one?
That's right. Yeah, it's wilderness ATC for Wilderness Carry Defense Against Wildlife. If you're engaged in a profession where you can make a case that you can't carry a non-restricted long gun for these purposes, you can apply for this authorization to carry. But again, it's pretty narrowly defined and narrowly controlled by provincial chief firearms officers. We recently had a case in Quebec where a trapper applied to renew his license, renew his permit, his carry permit, and was refused. We just don't think you need it anymore. So we're not going to renew your permit. Go away. We intervened in the case. We took the Quebec Chief Provincial Firearms Officer to court and actually got them to take another view of the case and reissue the permit. So they made a mistake.
So this was reissuing a permit. This was reissuing.
That's right, reissue the permit.
Somebody had decided that he was safe to do this before, and all of a sudden somebody in the officialdom just said, no, he isn't. What was their basis for that?
What's their basis for that?
If he was safe to do it before and he hasn't committed a criminal act or has been in a mental health facility for some reason or something like that, what was their motivation for saying, no, we're not going to reissue your permit?
a change in policy. I'm sorry, we've changed our policy, and you no longer qualify under that change. Now, under the Firearms Act, chief provincial firearms officers have the power to do that, and that's one of our biggest complaints about it, is this Firearms Act imbues bureaucrats with too much power-making capability, okay? There's no two ways around it, and this is where a general reform of firearms laws with new legislation is absolutely necessary, because we can fight these type of cases till the cows come home, and we can get positive court precedent coming out of it. But until it's changed through legislation, you're just chipping away.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the Ruger 1022 high capacity magazine. So, for our American listeners in Canada, if you have a rifle that takes a center fire cartridge, you can only have a magazine that can hold 5. Okay? So if you did have an AR-15, you can't have a magazine that will hold more than 5 center fire cartridges. Although a rim fire cartridge, you can have unlimited capacity. There's no law on that. But the RCMP woke up one morning and decided that now thousands of owners of the Ruger 1022, the most popular rifle in the world, by the way, all of a sudden it was illegal. What happened there?
Basically what happened was... and this applies to rimfire rifle magazines over 10 rounds for the Ruger 1022 rifle. Basically, they decided they took a look at the Ruger Charger handgun, and they decided that this handgun takes rimfire rifle magazines, and hang on one second here. Can I help somebody?
Our guest is busy.
Basically,
sorry about
That's okay.
that. I got called away. Yeah, no, they decided that all rifles made for the Ruger 10, all magazines made for the Ruger 1022 rifle were handgun magazines because of the Ruger Charger handgun. They changed their policy on it overnight, and millions of Canadians became criminals.
So the magazine fit 2 different Ruger products, one being a rifle, one being a handgun.
And based on that, the RCMP decided it was a handgun magazine. Tens of thousands of these rifles in Canada, and millions of Canadians became criminals overnight because of it.
So the RCMP can just make up laws as they go, and we're all beholden to them. How does that work?
Yeah, how does that work? This is the Firearms Act. This is the Firearms Act that allows them to do that. And that's why we argue so vehemently for a change to the gun laws.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and they'll railroad you over gun. We've got separate classes of laws. I mean, if you commit a crime with a gun, it's a different law that you're breaking than if you, say, held up a gas station with a knife. Is that correct?
Yes and no. And frankly, this is one of the biggest problems we have, because the firearms charge is routinely the most common charge to be plea bargained away.
Really? That's the first one they try and drop on you.
Oh, absolutely. We'll drop the firearms charge if you plead to the robbery charge.
Okay. Yeah. And incidentally, that's what they do. They try to get you to plea bargain to something because they know they don't have a lot to stand on. We've only got about 30 seconds left here. So after this break, let's talk about what people need to understand in dealing with the cops here in Canada if you are a firearm owner. And,
sure.
Basically you need to keep your mouth shut and have an NFA membership. That would be a good start, but we'll get into all the ins and outs of how they try to railroad you and, some different cases that you've come across in your career as the vice president and acting president of the National Firearms Association. The True North, strong and free and armed to the teeth. We'll be back right after this.
Syntec Global XFT is a breakthrough product trusted around the world for over 20 years. Syntec Global XFT will maximize engine life and fuel economy, maximize horsepower and performance, and minimize emissions. XFT packs an incredible amount of benefits into one small concentrated dose and comes with a 100% satisfaction guarantee. That's Syntec Global XFT. Put it to the test.
Head over to AmericanuckRadio.com now to get your extreme fuel treatment. That's AmericanuckRadio.com.
Welcome back to Americanuck Radio. This is your host, Mike Phillip. I actually just got a question here. Somebody tweeted me, Devious Dave Rose in Toronto. It says here, Americanuck, can you ask the NFA guy about their thoughts on Canada's castle laws and if they're advocating for home dwellers? Do we have any kind of castle doctrine here?
No, there is no castle doctrine. It's a very, very complicated issue in Canada. Yes, you do have the right to defend yourself. You can even defend yourself with a firearm if you're forced to. However, if you think you're ever going to be in a position to do it, you better get a copy of the Criminal Code of Canada. Even study the use of force rules surrounding defending yourself. Educate yourself. Know what's permitted, acceptable under the laws in Canada, and you'll be much better armed. Not only defend yourself from an individual, but also defend yourself from the law, should it come to that.
Well, it's too bad that that's the case, but that is the case. So, yeah. What were you going to say, Craig?
A big part of it, if you scream many times you are under arrest, citizen's arrest, drastically changes it, because then you're in defense of your life while trying to stop a criminal act.
That's very important, and a lot of Canadians don't understand that. We all have the right to enforce the Criminal Code of Canada. There's no law enforcement officer present. It's up to you. It's your duty to enforce the law. And you do have the right to do that under the Criminal Code of Canada, including the powers of arrest. And once you have enforced those powers of arrest, you do have increased powers to detain an individual or defend yourself against an individual.
Do you have a case in mind where that actually was a legitimate defense, where somebody used a gun to stop a crime and they told the perpetrator that they were under arrest and they got off on it? Like, has that happened?
Oh, it certainly has happened many times in the past. But again, you have to understand the powers that are conferred by doing that. Okay, it can prevent people from having to suffer the full weight of the law. If a court decides that you are trying to act within the law and in support of the law, it's going to strengthen your position a lot more than somebody who's just seen as irresponsibly engaging in some kind of vigilante violence.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know, if you're going to shoot somebody in Canada, tell them they're under arrest first.
Yeah, and it's even more complicated than that. If you are forced to shoot somebody in Canada, what the court's going to look at is, was that a reasonable defense? What was your perpetrator? What was the individual who was trying to harm you? How was he trying to do that? And if some guy's trying to pummel you with his fist and you shoot him, that is very likely not going to be accepted as a reasonable defense. Somebody else has a firearm, that might be seen as a more reasonable defense if you are forced to use your own firearm. You are trying to operate within the law. You are trying to use the least amount of force necessary and reasonable to defend yourself. Again, it's this idea of vigilante violence, which Canadian courts really want us to be seen as cracking down on. And when it comes to firearms, it's a very, very complicated issue. And again, it is lawful in many cases for you to do that, but you better educate yourself. You better understand the Criminal Code of Canada and use the force continuum if you think that you're ever going to find yourself in that situation.
Well, you guys have it all posted over at NRA.ca. I was looking at it the other day, and it's actually a pretty interesting read looking into the self-defense laws.
NFA.ca. NFA.ca is going to get you an American law, not
did I say NRA? I did too.
It's a common mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. The NRA that's the Canadian IRA, actually.
Yeah, so. On their website, it's in the members area, and there's different headings, legal issues, et cetera, et cetera. Yes. And yeah, even if you aren't a gun owner, they are an entertaining read, because it would there's how ignorant we are of the laws and it's your rights. There's a conflict. There's a bit of a conflict in what is law and what is your right.
Yeah, and that's the problem. We haven't asserted our rights to the degree that we should have in Canada. You know, we're very cooperative. We're very easygoing about that, and it's kind of gotten us in the situation we're in now, where our rights, our culture is in danger, has been for a very long time. But having said that, I do have to say that Canadians are standing up for those rights in a bigger way than they ever have.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody head over to nfa.ca, and I got to tell you, the No Compromise T-shirt with the outline of the maple leaf and what was that, a C9?
C8.
C8, right, okay. I never remember those. I mean, I always think AR-15 or M4, right? But
yeah, C8, M4.
Yeah, it's super cool. It's really cool. I mean, as a Canadian, I'd be proud to wear one. Now, you told me in a previous conversation that you could make it happen to send me a T-shirt for having you on this show. Is that going to happen?
Yeah, I can probably make it happen.
All right, this is a legally binding verbal contract. You understand that now? It's out there. If I don't get a T-shirt, I'm coming after you.
You're coming after me?
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
And it would be
I better check the use of force continuum.
Yeah, that's right.
and make sure it's a size ladies small.
Yes, we have those.
I bet you do, yeah. It's for my Chihuahua.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
No, it's a very provocative image, and it's one we want to put out there more and more in Canada.
Absolutely. So let's talk about storage and carting around a firearm in Canada and some of the laws, because that's one of the things that they try to ding you with, unsafe storage. Can you get into that a little bit?
A lot of this comes down to your intent, okay? What is your intent in regards to your firearms in your home? Now, your firearms can be out of storage for any reason, okay? If you're in the house, you're authorized to be in possession of firearms by virtue of having a firearms license. Do your firearms have to be in storage, or can they be sitting out? They can be out of storage for any reason. Even if you just want to gaze lovingly upon them, they can be out of storage. However, it gets more complicated depending on the situation. Now, what's your intent? My intent is to leave the house and go to work. Well, then those firearms better be in storage, and they better be stored according to regulation. We get a lot of cases where people have the police come to your house, the guns are out for cleaning, that sort of thing. The police walk in and say, those guns should be in storage. I'm going to charge you with a storage offense. It's a wrongful charge, because your intent is not to store the firearm. Conditions do not dictate that the firearm should be in storage. And in a lot of cases, police lay a wrongful charge, and we have great success in getting that charge knocked out. Transportation. We get storage regulations being applied to firearms being transported, and that's wrong, too. There's a lot of ignorance about these laws. And if you find yourself in this situation, you need to be contacting us, nfa.ca, because we can provide you with the court precedent that you need to defend yourself.
Yeah, that's just it. Well, and here's the other thing that Americans need to understand. In Canada, if you have a restricted firearm, you are only allowed to transport it to and from a gun range, and any deviation from that course is seen as, basically a felony. That's what I've heard. Am I correct?
Yeah, authorization to transport is necessary to do that. And there's a lot of ignorance about that, too. You know, what is the most direct route between the range and your home?
Right.
What they really want to discourage is a couple of things. You know, the casual transportation of restricted firearms. You stop off, you go shopping, you go have a couple drinks, that sort of thing. They really want to discourage that. And I think most responsible people would understand that if you're transporting a firearm, yeah, you're going to do what you intended to do. You're going to be responsible about it. And when you're done, you're going to take it home and you're going to store it according to regulation. That's fine. But unfortunately, it gets a lot of people, because it's, you know, some things are narrowly defined. This is very loosely defined. Can you be charged? Even if you're holding a license, a registration, authorization to transport, can you still be charged because they think you're not taking a direct enough route? Probably you can, and it has happened in the past, and that's a problem with the firearms laws, and the only way it's going to change is if we have a new Firearms Act.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, and with that, I mean, if you have a restricted weapon at home, it's got to be locked up. The ammunition has to be locked separately. And then, so,
that's not necessarily true. Again, a lot of the regulations. The ammo can be stored in the same locked container as the firearm. If you're storing the firearm and the ammo in a safe, you are storing according to regulation. If you're storing it in a different manner, that may not be the case. The ammo may be required to be stored separately. It really depends on the circumstances.
I have a question for you. So the storage versus the transportation laws and regulations.
30 seconds left.
We'll just skip this till the next time we talk. My question.
Yeah, well, you know what? I think we should have you on at least once a month to give an update to educate Canadians on gun laws and their rights. So does that sound good to you, Blair?
Sounds good to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Blair Hagan of the National Firearms Association. Head over to nfa.ca. Grab yourself a really cool T-shirt and get a membership for $35 a year. This is Mike Phillip with Americanuck Radio. Pleasure to have Blair with us today, and Mike, and all the great topics we talked about. Have a great long weekend, everybody. We'll see you next Saturday.
Americanuck Radio.